So thank you all so much for coming. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Los Altos History Museum. For those who don't know me, my name is Anna Toledano, and I am the executive director at the museum. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the hard work of my colleague, Amy Ellison, who's the curator and director of exhibitions, who has made this wonderful event happen today. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here with us today because her child is ill, but she really, we owe her a giant shout out for making this happen. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to our this third Wednesday event that is in conjunction with our current exhibition going on in the lower gallery, which I hope you've had a chance to check out. She sang me a good luck song. And today we have the pleasure to welcome Michael Wilcox from Stanford University to give us a talk related to some of the themes that we address in that exhibition. Michael is an Indigenous and Native American scholar of Yuman descent who's taught at Stanford since 2001. He received his doctorate in anthropology and archaeology from Harvard in 2001, where he was instrumental in founding the Harvard University Native American program in fulfillment of Harvard's 1638 charter as an Indian college. Dr. Wilcox has been on the faculty of Stanford since 2001. Shout out to my alma mater. First as an assistant and associate professor of anthropology, and currently as a senior lecturer in Native American Studies in the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. He currently leads research projects from the Stanford Indigenous Archaeology Lab in the Archaeology Center, and is a faculty affiliate in Stanford Earth, the School of Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences. In 2020, he received the Departmental Award for Outstanding Teaching in Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. Dr. Wilcox also serves as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area, who we welcomed at our last third Wednesday event, and is the founding board member of the Muwekma Ohlone Cultural Preservation Land Trust. His recent publications include The Pueblo Revolt and the Mythology of Conquest and Indigenous Archaeology of Contact. He's also the co-editor of Rethinking Colonial Pasts Through Archaeology. His current research involves documentation of indigenous rebellions and in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as Aina-based research and education of Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiian communities in Hamakua, Hawaii. He's working on an interdisciplinary project about the indigenous history of the San Francisco Bay Area entitled Claiming Home, Reclaiming History, Rebellion, Mobility, and the Narratives of Invisibility Among California's Bay Area Natives. Please give a warm welcome to Michael Wilcox.
Thank you, Anna, and thanks everybody for coming. It's really good to see so many people out on what day is today? Wednesday? Day after tax day. I hope we're all feeling a little okay right now, a little nervous. So I want to start by acknowledging that we're on the land of the Muwekma Ohlone people, and it's a privilege to have grown up in this area. If you live here, it's one of the most beautiful places on the world, I think. Yeah, I was born in Redwood City, California, 1967. So I'm old now. Something happened. I don't know what happened, but I managed it. I'm not really, I know, I'm gonna get heat for saying that, but I work with young people I have for my whole career, so I always get older and older. They're always the same age. So I manage a dormitory at Stanford called Muwekma, which is named in honor of the tribe. It's a Native American dorm. We have Native Hawaiian people, Native American, everybody who wants to can live there. But what I'm going to talk about today is the history of the Muwekma Ohlone people and the reframing that I think needs to take place in order for us to understand what Muwekmas are still doing here. So if you're born in the area, if you're raised in California, raised in San Francisco Bay Area, if you're like me, I never even knew the name of any tribe in the Bay, never. I didn't hear of any name. And I was 30-something years old before I met the first member of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe at Stanford in an archaeology lab. And so that's a problem, right? Especially because there's such a great history here that I'm going to talk about today, and you're going to wonder, why don't we know this? Why don't we have access to this information? So the work that I'm doing is part of an effort kind of a group of people. I'm going to name some people who are very helpful in creating this research. Mark Hilkema, just retired from State Parks, was a really instrumental colleague in helping me get started. Matt Baldzakowski, who worked for MidPenn and opened up a research project for me and my colleague Sam Connell. Sam Connell's a professor at Foothill College. Foothill has actually a really great archaeology lab, probably better than Stanford. But it's also the top-rated community college in the state. It's amazing. So I went to Kenyatta College. When I was a high school student, I graduated and I went to Sarah High School. There's all these little threads here. And I grew up in San Carlos, which is the name of the first ship to come into the bay. And I had all these little threads. I didn't really understand how to put this whole thing together. So Sam has been a really important colleague, and so has Gustavo Flores, who translated many of these documents we're going to look at today. And also Lee Panich. You should be looking for a new book coming out from Lee Panich at Santa Clara University. He's going to talk more in his book about the research that I'm doing here. We all work together, and you need a team. I'm not a single person who put all this together. We all rely upon each other, and we need colleagues and helpers. And finally, the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. So I just was at a language conference this morning with members of the tribe. Joey Torres is a culture bearer, and Joey initiated the first fire dance that it hadn't happened in the Bay Area since the missions, so about 200 years. And this just happened over the summertime. You can see a beautiful silhouette. I'm not going to tell you where that was, but it's at Stanford somewhere. And so I want to start with this because we need to work back from this image. We need to find out what's the explanation for what these people are still doing on the planet 500 years after contact with Europeans. And that's a story that is difficult for people to access, right? So many of the stories that deal with Native Americans in North America, anywhere, deal with an absence. It's an explanation of why they're not here, why we're not here. And if you're a Native person, you got a little existential problem there, which is that you don't have a story that explains what you're doing here today. So the dance was started up because of this interest that people have right now in uncovering these hidden histories of the Bay. So in San Carlos growing up, I went to a Catholic school, St. Charles Elementary School, and in 4th grade we had to do this mission project. I'll talk about that. The mission project, sometimes these things torque you. Go, oh, I don't really like this story that I'm being asked to retell. And the missions are the center of just about every single study of Native Americans in California. The missions are only here for 64 years, people. That's it. I'm almost that old, and it's not that long. So the purpose is that, we have to think about how do we tell a story that includes the 10 to 12 to 15,000 year history of Native people in the Bay, so that we're not centering the missions, we're talking about other kinds of things. So when I started my career, I was really interested in understanding what are the different kind of historical, archaeological, anthropological stories that are told that explain the absence of a people. And so I came up with this idea of terminal narratives. These are narratives that are kind of inserted into just about every single account of Native people in any, probably not this museum, I haven't, because they're a little bit more ahead of things, but there's a whole host of things. The first is that indigenous peoples are depicted as believing that Europeans were gods, that we lacked a concept of foreignness. Nothing could be further than the truth. We had no experience with colonial powers or empires. That's not true either. And we're unable to cope with new kinds of information or new kinds of deities. And I want to start with this picture here. This is from Louis Choris. Louis Choris is a Ukrainian young person who is recruited to be on a ship captained by this person, Otto Kotzebue. Kotzebue, Alaska is named after him. He enters San Francisco Bay in 1813, and he does these watercolors, and I think some of these are pastels. I've never seen the originals. But I like looking at these because it tells a very different kind of story. If you look at history textbooks, even the ones that are recently published, they'll say that there are no Native people in California in the Bay Area after about 1820. And it's not true. This painting is from 1813. And it shows that Native people are still here. We didn't all expire from diseases or introduce diseases. People are healthy, the communities are still active. And in this one painting, you can see that this is from, can you tell me where this is from? I'm gonna be teacher here. Does this look familiar to anybody? Mission Dolores in San Francisco, right? So that's it. Looks a little different now. But if you look at the paintings tell a story. And the story that's told is interesting. So you might look at this and say, well, they're doing something in front of this mission. They're dressed up in regalia. Those stripes are part of a ceremonial complex called the Big Head Complex, or the Ghost Dance Complex. That's an anthropological term, but it's a ceremonial and religious structure. It's a way of, it's a very important kind of cosmological, religious or spiritual orientation. Many California natives have references to this, the Big Head Dance, the ghost dances. But let's just look here. So we see these folks in the front are dancing, and they're dancing in front of what? In front of those priests who are in the back. The priests are in the back, and who are near the priests? Little kids, right? So the kids were recruited into the missions because it was believed that Father Sarah in particular thought that the older adults were not worth converting. They weren't worth saving. You could do a mass baptism on them, but they were too far gone. And there's an interesting book by Stephen Hackle. Read it. It's about Sarah, interesting person from Mallorca. We're not going to talk a lot about Sarah, but just understand that he's a religious zealot. He's would be an extremist today, right? And we can say that because he was regarded by his own colleagues and peers as someone who pushed things a little bit too far, right? So we don't have to evaluate the past by our own standards today, but we can peek at them and we can say, well, did people at that time have criticisms of the way that things were handled? And they did. They had criticisms of that. So I'm not going to dive into a serology because it's not productive. But what you see here is people are dancing in front of a mission. Now, it looks to me like just a painting, but really it's a power play. What you're looking at is someone doing a religious dance, a spiritual dance in front of their spiritual center, their spiritual world. And that wouldn't have happened if the missionaries had complete control over everything, and they didn't. And this is the story that we're kind of uncovering, which is that the Bay Area was not a place where people just went to the side and went into the missions and then expired and died. It didn't happen that way at all. There were many, many rebellions in the Bay, San Francisco Bay, that Gustavo and Lee Panitch are documenting through these hidden histories. And I'll talk about some of those folks. But the point is that when we're looking at this, we have to look at these paintings with a new kind of perspective. So it's a performance, it's in front of their ritual, ceremonial structure. It's something it's an assertion of sovereignty in my mind, right? And the kids are in the back. That's really important because they wanted to bring children into the missions, believing that if they brought them in, they could convert these people into Christianity and they could start fresh with a new life, right? Well, what happens is quite different. In my studies of rebellions in the Americas, all the little kids who are brought into the missions become very powerful brokers between two different cultural groups. Just as immigrants have children who go to school and have to translate things back and forth, these young people knew and had access to Spanish, they had access to Latin, and they also spoke the languages of their home countries, or their own territories. So you think about that, that's power. And that power is reflected in their ability later on to launch these rebellions. So Pomponio is one. Pomponio's caves over on the other side, up in the mountains here. Pomponio Beach, that whole area. There's another person called Yoshkalo, who's in Santa Clara. These are all directly related to and ancestors of Muwekma Ohlone people. So we have documentation that links them. And then there's another person called Estanislao. Estanislao was at Mission San Jose until the 1830s. He leads another group of rebellions. He's Yokuts and probably Ohlone, and he doesn't get murdered. He's never killed. He dies of natural causes in San Jose at the mission. So how's this happen? How does this take place? Well, we have to understand that those people who were brought into the missions kind of knew how to work and use the implements of warfare. They knew how to ride horses. They knew how to do everything that the Spanish people did. And they took advantage of these good relationships to express something that anthropologists call agency. So there's structure and agency. Agency is what I can do in my life. It's my ability to make changes, to pick up things, to do things on my own. Structures are the things that limit us within our lives, right? Okay, so here we go. Now this is Chairwoman Charlene Nijme and the Vice Chair Monica Arellano. And just going back to this, I want you to kind of keep this in your mind. Terminal narratives, there are 4. It's really easy. You can predict them. You can find them in every textbook. Disease-based population crashes, check. Military conquest, kinetic warfare, check. Missionization, the idea you convert to Christianity, you're no longer a native person, check. Acculturation, the idea that if you're a Navajo person, you drive a pickup truck and you got a satellite dish on your roof and you have a propane heater, you're no longer native because you've adopted so many Western implements. That's an anthropological construction, and it needs to kind of go away. For me, the reason why I think this is so important, and the centering kind of philosophy is explaining, your location. I'm here because people put me here. You're all here because your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors put you in this spot too. And many of us had these tailwinds that allowed us to have really decent and productive and happy lives. And I'm here because of this woman and other people. This is Rosa Carvajal, born in 1895 in Yuma, Arizona. I knew her until I was 10 years old. I was terrified of her because she would run around and try and catch me and give me kisses, and she was like, oh my goodness. So if you're a little kid, that's Yuma. That's what it looks like. Now, Yuma's not the center of the universe. It could be for people who live there, for my ancestors, but certainly Yuma was a kind of strange place. It was at the crossroads of the lower Colorado River, where it empties into is it still called the Gulf of California? I don't know. Maybe you got the freaking name changed. But so the U.S. government put a territorial prison there just to keep things under control. But that is a really important part of our story here, because the reason why California is not explored until the 1700s is because that river crossing was controlled by Yuma people. And they didn't allow Spanish people to come north across an overland route. So California is colonized fairly late, 1700s, 1776, 1779, the same time that things are happening on the East Coast, and Hawaii too, where I work. So they're all connected, and I'm not going to get into Hawaii today, maybe another time. But I want to emphasize this too. So this is another one of these paintings, and it says in the caption, it says this is a depiction of it's a young Native California woman who can be purchased for the cost of a bottle of whiskey. So she's 10 years old. And I say this because, not to highlight trauma and difficulties, but because it's useful to kind of understand like how Native people are still here, the kinds of things that they had to go through. And I think we can celebrate not the difficulties and hardship, but we have to kind of understand how difficult it was for people to be here, even not that long ago. My great-grandmother she didn't get to live with her family. She was an indentured servant. The Indentured Servitude Act extended into the 1920s here in California. So did citizenship, was not extended to Native people. So if you're a Native person, you couldn't vote, you couldn't testify in court against a white person, you couldn't own guns, there were all these restrictions placed on people. So, mythologies of extinction, now how did they come from? Well, anthropology, my discipline, is responsible for a lot of these extinction narratives. And why? So this is Kroeber. Kroeber's really famous for his book about Ishi. Everybody give me some Ishi. There you go. Okay, so you read that. It's a wonderful book. It was one of my first anthropology texts. He's the father of California archaeology. In 1925, he says, the Costanoan group is extinct so far as all practical purposes are concerned. A few scattered individuals survive whose ancestors were once attached to the mission San Jose. That's where the Muwekmas are. San Juan Bautista, that's where Amamutsin and Esalen folks are, and San Carlos, which is a little further south. But they are of mixed tribal ancestry and live lost among other Indians or obscure Mexicans. Yikes. What in the world is an obscure Mexican? I don't know. I really don't. Obscure Mexicans. Claim your heritage. But what this does is it shows kind of how this is the state of the art. And everybody who worked in California was trained either by Kroeber or his descendants, his intellectual descendants. So if your founding idea is that these people are gone, you have no interest in interviewing them, doing ethnographic work with them, you're really not paying attention to who these people are, and you think that they're kind of not interesting. And that has a dramatic and terrible effect on Native people in California, particularly the Muwekmas, because this guy is hired by Phoebe Apperson Hearst. Hearst Fortune, you could look at him like, he's kind of like, Hearst would be, I know, I can ask, who's seen Citizen Kane? Yay! Okay, so that's based on Hearst. Hearst is kind of like, what's that, the Fox News person? The guy who owns all that stuff. Murdoch, okay, he's like the Rupert Murdoch of the day. And he had this fantastic wealth. Sound familiar? This is a broken record in the Americas, but certainly. He's hired by Phoebe Apperson Hearst to found the anthropology department at UC Berkeley. And one of the first things he does in that capacity is declare these people extinct. And we're going to come back to that. Now, the other thing we want to talk about today is lots of things. But this is the map of the U.S. It shows tribal lands. And maps all tell stories. And if you look at east of the Mississippi River, right down that middle part right there, there are no, what do you see? There are no reservations. None. What happened? The policies of Americans and the policy of the British and the policy of the French were very different. So the kind of colonialism that you encountered as a native person determined how you survived and the kinds of claims on land that you have today. If you look at the middle part there, look at the Southwest, there's tons of big reservations there. That's because those were not really thought to be very interesting to American people at the time. There's no active farming in the middle of the Navajo reservation. You can't do a lot there. And then you have these large reservations there. And of course, the center is the Pueblo world, where the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 took place. Got a book about that. And if you look at California, that's the next one down. Check this out. Why are there no reservations in California? There are, but there are 200 tribes here. And they have little tribal areas called rancherias. Rancherias are just another word for reservation, but they're tiny. So what happened here? What happened is the Americans came, and the Americans invalidated a lot of the treaties that were set up between Native people and the federal government. I'll talk about that in a second. But I just want you to know that there's a reason behind that. So indigenous archaeology is just a way of reframing what it is. What archaeology is, how you study the past, how you study history, right? So our assumptions are this, that we seek connections between contemporary people in the past. I want to talk about Muwekmas, I go talk to Muwekmas, then I look at their history. I don't read a book about them, look at artifacts and go, what happened to these people, right? If your subject area, if what you're looking at, your data set is a cemetery, which is how a lot of the mission studies are. It's all based on cemeteries, births and deaths, mostly deaths. Or it's artifacts, and you're looking at something that needs to be explained, which is an absence. What happened? Why aren't these people not here anymore? You're going to have a bias in your research that doesn't allow you to create explanations of continuity. So we reject terminal narratives as potent and invisible dimensions of colonization, right? So colonization is not just an event. It isn't just guns, germs, and steel. It's the story itself, right? So when I'm a kid at St. Charles Elementary School and I look in a history book and I go, where's the Yumas? Nowhere. They're not in there. It's because it's not interesting, or it wasn't interesting at the time. So we also view colonization as an ongoing process, not an event. So when we do these land acknowledgements, and they're very, very important, don't get it twisted. People kind of think, oh, that's kind of, performative. No, because prior to these land acknowledgements, no one was even asking the question, who lived here before? And that creates conversations that people have in institutions like Stanford, San Jose State, Mid-Penn, state parks. It creates this opportunity for engagement. Now, Native people don't like to think of ourselves as victims of anything. We're not victims at all. And as a matter of fact, if you look at two different kinds of narratives of personhood, you could talk about Judaism as a celebration of persistence through very, very many difficulties through time, hundreds and thousands of years sometimes. And we celebrate that. Why do we not have the same kind of generosity or same kind of explanation for this particular group of people? And there's a reason, and I think that it's difficult to live among Native people if you don't know what that story is about how I got here. And I want to emphasize this again. When I teach Native students at Stanford, we have them from all over the country who come to our university and Native studies programs, and I say, look, you're here as part of this process called settler colonialism. You benefit just as I do from this process, right? So I'm here because at some point in time, this land was opened up for my parents to buy a little tiny house in San Carlos. And I think what we can do, I don't know that we can try and immediately rectify everything, but just as a kind of point of thinking about things, Stanford has 8,000 acres of land, and the Muwekmas have 0 acres in the whole Bay Area. So the Muwekma Ohlone Land Trust, the Preservation Foundation, is just designed to start a conversation. Hopefully we can get donations so we can buy property for the tribe, so they can have housing, so that they can have access to the same kinds of services that other reservations do. Okay, so mythologies of conquest. Indigenous people believe that Europeans were gods, lacked the capacity to deal with other different peoples. Now, if you read these early accounts, you'll see a variety of different reactions to from native people to these explorers who come into the bay. In many cases, they just look at them and they're like, here's some food, we'll see you. Because there are protocols and there are ways that every tribe has for introducing themselves to foreign people who come into the area. So when the first ships come into the bay, when Portola comes up north, when De Anza also enters into the bay, every time they meet people, they have to sit there for this very long conversation from the person who they're encountering. And they don't know what they're saying. They imagine that they know what they're saying, but they really don't know what they're saying. Matter of fact, Franciscans as missionaries were not very interested at all in learning indigenous languages. They just didn't. There's one person who created a dictionary down in Mission in Monterey. But other than that, they didn't know how to speak the languages. They couldn't talk to the people they were working with. Not like you and I can. So, let's see. I forgot what I was going to say. There we go. It'll come back. Okay, so lack the capacity to deal with different kinds of people. Everybody has this. You know, when you're entering a room, you figure out who I'm talking to. That evaluation extends to Native people too. They're figuring out, like, what is this person? And more importantly, when they're given gifts to these explorers, you can go back to Cortez. Cortez is given all these beautiful implements by the Aztecs, the Aztec emissaries. And he thinks that they believe that he's a god and they're giving him the things. No. What that is a reciprocal exchange. It's not a market economy, it's a tribute economy. And when I have wealth and I give it to you, I'm saying, here's what I have, what do you have? You're establishing a social relationship with those people. And the more wealth you can present, the more the obligation is to return things. That's the understanding economically of what happens in these encounters. So here we go. Maps. Okay, so these are language families. I like the idea that there are language families and colors and groups, but listen, there's no boundaries. Like, this is a nation state. It looks like counties. People knew multiple languages everywhere. Our ancestors go 2 generations back. Your ancestors knew multiple languages if they were from another part of the world, especially Europe. But so these people would have been multilingual. They know how to speak different languages. And they would have understood things. So this is a very famous kind of, I don't know, it's Wikipedia. In the Bay, it says 5 languages are spoken: Costanoan, Ohlone, Bay Miwok, Plains Miwok, Patuan, and Wapo. So that's kind of the general area. But they could still understand one another. They knew how to speak those languages. And they married out into those groups of people too. Okay, so the differences between those dialects would be like Portuguese and Spanish. That's the way it's been described. And finally, the one word I want to say about Ohlone. Ohlone is a name of a village that's on the coast. Ohlone, where's that word come from? There are a bunch of different stories, but it also means people of the West. And it's not a Muwekma or Ohlone word. It comes from the people who the explorers met and said, "Who's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's the people of the West." That means the people of the East gave them that name. So what's their name? The name is Muwekma. That means people, the people, right? The people. So we can use that word. And we have all these mission maps and things like that. I'll stay away from that. There we go. So I'm going to talk about climate change, because climate change is part of this longer story that deserves a lot more attention than we give it, which is that Native people have already been through climate change. Your ancestors too. Shh. But everybody watched the sea level rise. If you look at the bay, as a young person, I remember going over the Golden Gate, where's the beaches? There's no beaches anywhere, because the sea level rose very quickly over a short period of time. And Native people, especially the Muwekma Ohlone people, saw this happen. They watched this climate change happen in real time. And their cosmologies reference emergence from water, relationship to water, to Mount Diablo as a piece of the earth that's stuck out of the water. Every group has a story of a flood. You ever wonder why? Because climate change happened about 10,000 years ago, 10 to 12,000 years ago. When the ice caps melted, the earth got warmer and wetter, and the sea levels rose. So people have stories about that. And then you have these beautiful peaks that are around the bay. Each one of the peaks is a view shed from which you can see everything. They're cosmological centers of knowledge. And I'm going to talk about, look, sea level rise. So this happened pretty quickly. Okay, so this is the sea level rise. This is real stuff that happened. And if you think about things, there were two major waterways that drained through the San Francisco Bay. One drained the southern Sierra Nevada mountains, went a river near the Guadalupe River now, went straight in front of Redwood City, all the way out to the area around what's now San Francisco. And the other one is this massive waterway that drained the entire Sierra Nevada north through the San Francisco Golden Gate. Right? So it's not a bay, it's an estuary. It moves back and forth as the sea level rises, salt water comes in, fresh water comes out, and that movement created the most productive and beautiful and wonderful ecosystem imaginable. Why didn't Native people in California use agriculture? You don't need it. You got fish, you got the coast, you got coastal mammals, you have the plains, you have the prairies, you have grasslands, which is the #1 food source for Native people in California. Grasses, chia, California chia. There's a beautiful little flower called, shoot, I'm gonna forget right now. But anyway, when you see flowers in the mountains over here, those are foodstuffs that were planted by Native peoples, intended. They're still there. And when we remove the weeds at the Stanford Garden, these little guys pop up. They pop up because they're waiting for the weeds to disappear. They're in the ground for hundreds of years. It's pretty amazing, but they will come back. And they're fire adapted, folks. I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is Pleistocene, California. Between the middle and early Holocene, so when the ecosystems change, this is all done through all kinds of methods. Ice, the ice cores are one. Another really useful one are pollen cores that are pulled out of kind of sedentary ponds and lakes in the area, where you can see the past environment by looking at a thin slice of whatever period of time you're looking at. And you can date them too, so you know that these things happened. So what was this ecosystem like? Well, we know that Native people in California were living in close contact with California grizzly bears, the largest bears in the world, probably like Kodiak bears, they're about that size. Grizzly bears in California, they don't hibernate in the bay. So what do? They eat. They eat and they eat and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So a lot of the mission records talk about people being mauled by grizzly bears, right? Because they're a dangerous relative, but also a very important and potent, powerful relative. We also have these Pleistocene mammals that are adapted to this cold. The adaptation of Pleistocene mammals is to expand your surface area to volume ratio to make yourself bigger so you can handle cold, right? You get old and thin like some of us do. It's hard to go swimming in the ocean because you feel that cold. Same thing with you when you're traveling in cold areas. Animals are adapted this way too. And they don't disappear because they're overhunted. They disappear because their ecosystem is changing. Right? And what's the food? The food in the Bay is amazing. Go to Cafe Ohlone in the East Bay at UC Berkeley. I think that Luis and, what? Oh, yeah. Oh, so it's, I'm going to forget his name, but they started a restaurant that uses traditional Muwekma Ohlone food. I went there for a 7-course meal. It was the best meal I've ever had in my life. I'm not kidding, because it was everything that was eaten from here. And you think about, if you're raised here, you think, well, they just ate this nasty, like, acorn mush, and it was yucky, No, pine nuts, hazelnuts, things that taste like almonds. Those grasses, that's miner's lettuce that's here. Those are cakes, those are tamales that are made from those grass seeds. They were so nutritious and wonderful that when the explorers came through north out of Southern California, they were dying of scurvy. They had a couple of these meals from the Native people and they perked right up because that's what happens, right? So quail eggs, everything. So think about the palette, the wonderful palette of foods that are here. And of course, there's a picture of the bay, and there's Mount Diablo in the back. That's the place of origin for Muwekma people. It's a place of origin for many Native people in California because it's a viewshed that rivals Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. You can see further from there than you can just about anywhere in California, believe it or not. You can see some days down Mount Shasta up to, and I think Mount Whitney's people have seen it from there. So you can see everything from there. So that's your whole cosmology, your whole world. And then we have these cosmological figures. These are very important. This is a slide from my friend Mark Hilkema, who is a really fantastic scholar of Muwekma Ohlone people. I learned so much from him. But the main deities are eagles, hummingbirds, and coyotes. Muwekma people are children of Coyote. That's the deity that they align themselves with. When you think about, well, wouldn't it be like the sun or something? No. If you think about what a coyote is not a wolf or a dog. It's a highly adaptable being. It's clever, and it's a kind of figure who is able to navigate difficult spaces, live in very difficult circumstances, but also shows the way for how people can live. There's coyote there. Hummingbird. Hummingbird is really an important figure for many California tribes. The story that I've heard, and there are many stories, so there's not just one, but that the idea that hummingbird went down into the water and pulled up what was fire and held it in her throat, and that was given to human beings as fire. So just as Aeschylus and Prometheus talk about their introduction of new technologies in Greek and Roman mythology, Greek mythology, Native people have the same stories about how do we get these technologies? What do we do with this new stuff that we have? Hey, Sam. And then we have, there's my buddy Sam. Sam, there's Sam Connell, professor from Foothill. Go mob Sam afterwards. So, marshlands. The Bay Area was probably one of the most productive wetlands in the world. Massive flights of geese, fowl. When I excavated a site with Sam probably 10 years ago in Portola Valley, we found so many animals. We found bird bones, we found fish, we found sturgeon, and it's way up in the mountains, guys. Turtle shells, all kinds of animals that you probably are not used to seeing, but maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll come back, right? And of course, these are shell mounds. So shell mounds are kind of a bad story for archaeologists. They raided a lot of these. There's one shell mound called Mayfield Mound that's at the intersection of San Antonio and El Camino Real. It was raided for fertilizer to put on the fields that produced all the wonderful crops in Santa Clara Valley. No protection for any of these things. And in that process, all the graves, these are grave mortuary complexes, all those bodies were brought to UC Berkeley primarily. A few were sent to Stanford University, but it's basically why you don't see monumental architecture in the Bay, right? And this is one of my favorite Choris paintings too. Now this is a really cool one because it shows these two rowers are going back from Marin Headlands now to what's now San Francisco. They're going across the Golden Gate. Now the draft in that little Thule canoe, the Thule boat, is about that much. If you've been on the Bay, right, okay, you have to be a skilled oars person to be able to do that. Those oars don't look like anybody else's oars, do they? That's an interesting kind of, so they had a way to, we think about the Bay as like this barrier. No, it's a freeway. People are going back and forth all the time, bringing goods, ideas across these waterways. So they're expert boats people. And there are probably bigger boats that were in the ocean, but we don't know where they are, but definitely people are out there because we have the fishing weights for the nets that they use. We know that they're out there. But here we go. Now, these people don't seem to be dying. Maybe the person in the middle looks like they're a little bit ill. I don't really know. They could just be old. They could be tired. I'm not sure. But look at the bodies of the people. This is before Disney made men look like Marvel characters. And the point is that people in the past, people in California, had much better health profiles than we imagine. Right? They had a much richer diet, a much more diverse diet than we have today. And when the missionaries came through, they took away all that access to those food sources. So if it's not guns, germs, and steel, what is it? It's food systems. It's a transformation of a food system. The reason why these mountains here are covered with chaparral is because they were taken over by ranchers, the ranchers went away, and all that fire, that fuel load is out there right now. It did not look like that back in the day. It was tended and managed by Native people using fire ecology. So, gods and tribute, I'll move on to that one. So all I want to say is, look, Tenochtitlan, 1540, 1520, was the biggest city in the world. It had these causeways here, had a fresh and wastewater treatment systems with these chinampas. They're hanging gardens with fish that would eat the stuff below. It's an ecosystem. It's a heavily and highly managed area. People had technologies like this, and Muwekmas would have known that those people are down there because they're trade goods that come back and forth. Right? So that's the idea that Native people here didn't know. When they saw Spanish people, they freaked out. They knew what to do. They had powerful neighbors to their south. That's Tenochtitlan in what's now Mexico City. Yeah. So there's a modern kind of thing where you put the pane this way. You can see what it looked like in the past. It's pretty amazing. A student showed it to me. But anyway, acculturation, military conquest, that's another one. The idea that if you visit violence upon people, they will automatically become more tractable and more like you. That happens never. What happens is that people develop and cultivate resentments that are deep, and they don't forget. In every single case where people rebel against Spanish people, and I'll show you some examples of this, they don't forget. and they know, and they're not tractable, they become more resistant to whatever ideas are coming their way. So when I talked about the Franciscans not really learning the languages, you can contrast them with the Jesuits. The Jesuits were very interested in convincing you that Jesus was a good guy. And so they would translate the Gospels into those languages so that they could kind of share what the ideas, the ideologies of that world were. And this has big impacts on the California mission system because they weren't interested in giving anything to these people, ever. Junipero Serra did not turn over the land as he should have after 10 years. It was a 10-year period, and they're supposed to give these people land and have them populate. They didn't even think they were ready for it. So this is just, I won't get there. But this is from my first book, I talked about these rebellions that happen once that Aztec capital falls in Mexico City in 1519. They run out of gold and silver. They start going further and further north. And each one of these areas is an area of indigenous rebellion. They don't have control. The Spanish don't have control. Matter of fact, it continues into the mission period. You look at the letters, they're like, these people are going to come and get us. Tonight's the night. They're very concerned about being overrun. They're always worried about that. Okay, so how does this work? Now we know that 1540s is when the 1550s are when the Aztec capital falls, and then as soon as that happens, people moved away all the way over to what's now the Pacific Ocean. Cortez is one of these people. He tries to set up he runs out of gold and silver too, and he tries to set up a venture, getting pearls out of the Gulf of California using native labor. It doesn't work, so he has to go back home. But in the meantime, he starts to understand that there's a whole coastline, there's an area up north, there's an area down south. Now, to get the ships to work, remember that they don't go around the Cape Horn, or I think that's the name of it. They have to build ships, but there's nothing to build ships with. So they take the ships apart on the east coast, on the Atlantic side, put them on the backs of native people, walk them over the Isthmus of Panama, and reconstruct them there. Which means that when you put it back together, it kind of like everything else that I put together, it's kind of a little crappy, doesn't really work very well, because the shipbuilders who put them together the first time are not the same people. They're not knowledgeable about what to do. So what's my point? My point is that native people saw these ships coming up and down the California coast from 1540, 1560 on until the 1800s, until the 1700s. They knew that people were out there. Okay. All right, so these are shell mounds. These are documented by this guy named Nels Nelson. And Nels Nelson is a famous anthropologist, too, who probably, there's shell mounds right in the mountains here. You know that. They're not just in the bay. They're up on Skyline Boulevard. I won't tell you where they are, but I can find them. And that means that they're mortuary complexes. They're different. We don't really know exactly what they're for. And this is what it looks like up close. This is from my friend Mark Wilcox on the coast, amazing archaeologist. Now, fire ecology, so how is this landscape managed? When I'm walking through, I go for hikes all the time. I'm so lucky. We're all lucky if you get to go for those walks around here, especially right now. I see fence lines that go right through the middle of some chaparral. I'm like, what's that stupid fence doing there? It is because it didn't used to look like that. It used to look like that. So California grasses are adapted to fire. They only grow, they only reproduce, and not all of them, but many of them do. They need fire to reproduce. And they're also adapted to fire in that they're allelopathic. That means that they put out little chemicals that keep plants from growing around them. So they put out these hormones that keep plants spaced further and further away. Like, what's the adaptation? It's the adaptation to fire. It means that as your plants are further and further away, it means that when fire comes through, it doesn't race through like it can. We've seen those catastrophic fires happen. This is a highly managed landscape, highly managed. And these are food sources for people. Okay? So this is what we have today. This is wild oats. Look how closely together those things are packed. That comes out of the guts, the bellies of the animals that were brought by the Spanish from North Africa into the Americas. That's where it came. So they pooped that stuff out, and they started to replace these things with weeds. That's a problem. That's a huge fire load. You can measure the amount of energy that comes out of that. You can take a purple needle grass. It's a California native grass. There's some out here. You could pour lighter fluid on it, and it won't go up. It won't. And a lot of the native grasses and native plants in California they can't be burned. You'll see them. There are green spots at Edgewood Park. You'll see that there. Okay. So this is when I talk about food systems and the replacement of native peoples, not using guns, germs, and steel, but replacing food. This is from one of the first governors of California, the Bay Area, a person named Arriaga. I don't know if he's related to that Stanford dude. With attention to the widespread damage which results to the public from burning of the fields, customary up to now among the Christian and Gentile Indians in this country, whose childishness has been unduly tolerated, wrote Don Jose Joaquin de Arriaga, I see myself required to have the foresight to prohibit in the future, if it be necessary, of the rigors of the law, all kinds of burnings, not only in the vicinity of the towns, but even in the most remote distances, to uproot this very harmful practice of setting fire to pasture land. That's what kept people fed. Right? Okay, so what is this stuff? This amazing basket is a private collection. Baskets, so we don't have pottery in California because you don't need pottery. It's a bad idea to carry around pots. Pots are heavy, right? So what do you have? You have baskets. You can make them pretty quickly. People are very skilled in their art forms as well. And here's the other part. So California is the home to this bead complex. Now, talk to Mark Hilcom, he'll tell you that this goes back 9,700 years, and he would say it's the oldest monetary system in the world. And he may be right. So what is money? This is money. It's an abstraction of value that you put into an object that doesn't have an inherent function, right? So that's what, it's just as my dollars in our pocket, just as, it's actually debt. That's what it is. There's a good book about debt by this guy, Graeber, and what's the name of that? Graeber, the anthropologist. He passed away a couple years ago. So there's a monetary system. The Kuksu dance is a really important complex. It is what Christianity might be in terms of its spread, its reach in the California cosmology. And then here are these flicker feathers. These are native people. These are Muwekma people right there, right there. We know who did these paintings. Right? Okay, so empire, I won't talk about that. Cortez has this idea. So why didn't they go north? Why didn't these people go north into what's California? Well, here we go. The currents in California, the coast is treacherous for ships, right? It's not an easy place to do sailing. So they had to keep way off the coast, because they're going to run into rocks. No one wants to do that because you're toast. If you're in the if you've done sailing a little bit, it's kind of scary. You're on this little boat, you fall off, that's it. You can't even be seen if you fall off. So people be very careful. Two currents, right? There's one that comes down from Alaska, one that comes north out of Mexico, and it creates this ridge right around Point Conception or Santa Barbara that makes it very difficult to pass over that area. And there's actually, you can see walls of water where these two currents come together. It makes it difficult for ships to go. So where do they go? They go in this thing called the Manila Galleon route that starts off in Mexico. It goes up north to what's now the Philippines, China, Japan, goes across the Arctic, comes down around Alaska, and goes down. And how long does that happen? 200 years, at least 200 years. And there are shipwrecks. Let's see if I can get to some shipwrecks. I'm running out of time. It's a good story. Okay. Let me see if I have it. I don't know why I didn't bring it, but anyway, Drake's Bay in Marin County. There's two ships there. Drake's ship that runs aground. There's another called the Cermeño. So that happens in 1500. They crash, and they're on the shore for about a month. And all the sailors run away, like they should, because being in a boat with no water or food kind of sucks. And so they tried to escape. They were brought back, and they put together a smaller boat. But the point is that native people talk about diseases impacting people. Diseases went both ways, right? And your health is compromised when your food system disappears. That painting I showed you at the beginning, those are healthy people. They're not dead. They've survived whatever epidemics that happened up until 1820. So what happened, right? Food systems. Okay, so he establishes the first mission at San Francisco, and it's not a mission, it's just a lean-to, and they don't really have the labor to put those things together. And no one comes in voluntarily. Sometimes they do, but they're curious. A little bit later, they are pulled in. So there's three main missions, Mission Dolores, San Francisco, Mission Santa Clara, and then that's called the mothership. And then the East Bay is the last mission that was in the Bay created, which is Mission San Jose, which is in Fremont. That's where the Muwekmas end up. So the missionaries pull people into these missions. There's all kinds of trouble keeping people in those missions. People leave all the time. There are strikes. There are rebellions that Gustavo can talk about. Hopefully you invite him. But for the most part, Native peoples are not just sitting there and letting things happen. As soon as they're able, they learn how to testify in court. They find people who can advocate for them in the court system. Spain and Mexico, actually Spain, for all of its violence and brutality early in its conquest period, sets up a native court system So people can address grievances against the state. The Chief Palma of the Yuma people went down to Mexico City, negotiated a treaty so that they could have commerce through that community, because they're traders. They want to be connected to these big empires, right? Okay, so Native people did not stay in the missions. There are accounts of people just leaving. The priests will come out, but where's everybody? They're gone. They're gone. And these three leaders of these rebellions, Pomponio, Yoshkalo, and Stanislaw, would bring mostly girls. They would rescue girls who are locked into these barracks down a mission Santa Clara. It's heartbreaking to think of people being put there. And the accounts are brutal. They're not happy stories. It's just a very difficult thing to look at. So how did the populations crash? Well, men and women are segregated at night. What are you supposed to make babies? You can't. You can't. So people didn't die because of diseases. Their food sources were taken away. They were forced to eat basically terrible food that was brought in by the missionaries, mostly wheat and like a mush, and also the boiled bones and the broth of that from the cows that were slaughtered. About 30 to 45,000 cattle were in the San Francisco Bay. Those missions were not just missions. They were very, very wealthy places that when people from other countries came, they said, these are plantations. They're making a lot of money here, and they did. The missions couldn't be sustained. If they weren't self-sustaining, they would be shut down. And so they're very interested in making them productive. Okay, so I want to talk about that because I'm running out of time. Okay, here we go. Let's just do some these folks are really important. These are Muwekma relatives. We know we have mission records that connect people to these people who are on those roles today. Stanislaw is a Yoka person, baptized at Mission San Jose, leads a revolt in 1829. That's pretty close to Americans coming in, right? Baptized at San Francisco, Pomponio. He has a group called the Insurgents and Insurgentes who bring people out of the missions and go back and forth between Santa Barbara and San Rafael. They can't catch him, and they finally do. He's a 24-year-old person. He's murdered by the missionaries down in Carmel. So they capture him finally. And Yoshkalo, same thing. He's murdered over by the Almaden mines. All right. So these are more, this is Gustavo's work at translating these documents. That's where this information comes from. Okay, so like many rebellion leaders, he's raised in a mission. He's a North Bay Miwok person. Children are used by the missionaries to kind of be intermediaries, but they're not stupid. Just like you would be, like, wait a minute, what's going on? My family's suffering. What can I do to help? That's kind of the story. Now, the American period is probably the worst period. That's the explanation for why those reservations don't exist in California. Why are there big ones? Because the American government learned that there was gold. They squatted basically after this thing called the Mexican-American War. Polk, I'm sure Trump loves that person, but he kind of acquired the western United States. Abraham Lincoln said this is an unjust war. We're picking upon a neighbor. We shouldn't do this kind of work. So there are disputes and debates about the legality of what they're doing, but they annex it. And they bring these settlers out to California. They discovered gold. In the meantime, what had happened is the Americans got control of this territory nominally, and they sent out emissaries to negotiate treaties with all the tribes in California. Those are called the 18 unratified treaties. We can go here. Boy, we did 10,000 years. Pretty good, huh? Okay. So the 18 ratified treaties, that's where the reservations were supposed to be. They're all signed by Native people. They're brought back to Washington, D.C. for Congress to sign them off. That's what the territory is going to be. They all agree on that. And then gold's discovered. And these are locked in the National Archives for an indefinite period of time in the interests of national security. So there you go. That's the story. Not guns, not germs, not steel. Nothing like that. And then Governor Peter Burnett. So white supremacy, you think, well, come on. It's in the language. Everything's about race, about whiteness, about power and control. But it isn't just the only voice. There are people who are disputing these ideas. The white man, to whom the time is money and who labors hard all day to create comforts of life, cannot sit up at night and watch his property and after being robbed a few times. He becomes desperate and resolves upon a war of extermination. And he says that a war of extermination must be waged against these people so that we can bring them. They either have to leave or we're gonna make them die, right? So you think, well, what happened? Colonization is not just about food systems, it's about citizenship. Your inability to be a citizen, to care for yourself. If you're caught wandering along the roads or you're on by yourself, you could be captured and brought into jails. You're arrested. So they had these vagrancy laws in San Francisco that didn't allow people to walk around freely. If you were arrested, you were brought into the jail, and then you were kind of paroled to a mission, or actually a rancho person. So that's how people were separated from their families. Any Indians who were not employed would be arrested. Vagrancy laws were applied to all Indians. And finally, bounty lands. So bounty lands are here. Bounty lands are awarded to people for scalps or for participation in wars against Native people. They're here. This is from Midpen. Found this map with the blue squares right there are bounty lands in the Santa Cruz Mountains. There's evidence of this, right? So because this is a newspaper from Santa Cruz. It says, no more. The Board of Supervisors, having refused to levy any tax for scalps on this county, therefore, no more bills will be audited and paid for this fund. And for the Modocs just means a generic term for Native people, can continue to wear their hair long. So they're identified by the way that they look. It says no more. This is 1870. No more. That means it's happening, right? I'm not making it up. All right, so let's look at this complicated and interesting history. Now, just because I'm moving along pretty quickly and I'm running out of time, I just want to say this last, what? Are we over? Okay, so we're done. We're POW. All right, listen. So let me just talk about this really quickly. So the Muwekma Ohlone people are searching for recognition, federal recognition. They're trying to get people to understand this story in Congress, in the court system. They've been doing this for a long, long time. They're brought into the missions in Mission San Jose, Mission Santa Clara, over to the East Bay. When the missions dissolve, they're put into two areas. Bernal and Alisal are the two ranchos. Those are the ranchos that are owned by Phoebe Apperson Hearst. The person that she hires to found the anthropology department declares the people who are building her house extinct, right? And then after that, they have difficulty getting traction with the federal government. They're still recognized. They went to Indian schools. They're noted as veterans in their paperwork as Native people from California. So that's not the question. It's not about evidence. It's about politics. So what are the politics? The politics are, sadly, for people who I care, like I'm a lefty person, but not all the time, not for everything. But one of the things that the Bay Area delegations have kind of frowned upon, Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein in particular, they never wanted Muwekma to have federal recognition because they're worried about casino. That's it. And a lot of the politicians in the Bay take money and funding from gaming tribes. Some are not even here. They're from Eastern Band of Cherokees. So they're fighting against these big business interests. So is it really just about money? No, because repatriation, to get those ancestors back from the museums around the state, you have to be a federally recognized tribe. So why does Berkeley have 500,000 artifacts and upwards of 10 to 12, 14,000 individuals in their museum collections? Because Muwekma has no standing to repatriate those individuals back to their graves. It's not just about that. And if you look at the early history of the tribe, especially in the 20th century, it's about protecting burial grounds. There's a shell mound thing I was going to show you. Anyway. There's a check that I can show that shows $668 to be awarded to every Muwekma person in exchange for the loss of property that came out in 1974 as reparations. That's at $600, right? Imagine what this place is worth now, just a couple of acres right around here. Okay. So recognition is a really important part of their story. But look, it's not about evidence anymore. It's about getting the political will from our politicians to say it's time to do something that's right. It's time to at least recognize this history. You don't have to give back all the land. Matter of fact, some tribes have no land. They have a tiny postage stamp size of land, right? So what does it mean? What's it about? It's about respect. You're not going to get a bunch of money from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The whole BIA budget is $2.7 billion. That's not even the budget for the city of San Jose. That's for 500 tribes, about 450, maybe a million. I don't know how many people, about 2 million tribal members. That's it. It's not like you're getting a big piece of the pie. It's about recognition. It's about being in history books. And that's what I hope you come away with today, is a sense that this history is interesting, infinitely more interesting than the histories that we're taught. And it's a story that we can celebrate the persistence of a people for all this time. They're still here. You know, they deserve our respect and our friendship. So donate to the Muwekma Ohlone Preservation Foundation if you can. Help us to get programming so we can educate young people, do those fire dances. That's why it's founded, to kind of start language programs, educational programs, and then in the hopes that someday they'll get a little piece of property. And once that one thing happens, it'll create a domino effect. It's not that big of a deal. So thank you so much for your time and attention.